evening, everyone. I think we're going to get started. Thank you for coming to the Junior Parent Night. I'm Donna Lyons, Director of the School Counseling Program here at Long Meadow High School. I wanted to let everyone know that this is being taped, as you can see, by LCTV. And I've been informed that as of Friday, it should be on their YouTube page, so you can view it from there. They will also have information on their homepage of their website indicating how it will fit into dates for their programming. But again, it will be posted on YouTube as of this Friday. Before we get started with the program and our panelists, which is the main part of our program tonight, I just wanted to let you know what we've been doing with the juniors over the last few weeks. We've been meeting with juniors in small groups, so we've been taking them out of their ice blocks. It's been anywhere from 5 to 10 students on average, and we've been going over the college search process. We did share with them a booklet that we've created so that when they leave us, because we give them so much information in that 1 hour time span, they're obviously not going to remember everything. So this has a really nice checklist in it. This is also on the Long Meadow High School website, so anyone can access the booklet. It is under the counseling drop-down on the LHS website. It's under college planning, and then if you scroll down under college planning to junior year, you will find the booklet. When you click on the cover of the booklet, it will open up all of the documents, and then you'll have access to each of the pages in this booklet. But I don't want to go through this in detail, but I do want to just tell you a few things that are in here. So the first thing that's in here is a college search checklist or outline. So this is very helpful because it really goes through all of the things that juniors should be doing between now and when they return in September of their senior year. So it talks about things like the testing timeline, thinking about when you're going to sign up for SATs and or ACTs. Which one should you take? And of course, students, can certainly go and look back at their PSAT scores if they took them, and the pre-ACT, which we gave to all sophomores last year. This booklet also has all of the test dates for this spring for ACTs and SATs, and then obviously students need to go to the individual websites to sign up for either of the tests. In regards to testing, there's also a comparison chart of SATs and ACTs. So for students who are undecided as to which one, even though they've looked at, maybe their scores from pre-ACT and PSAT, they can look at this comparison chart and get a sense of maybe which one is showing their strengths better than the other. Besides testing, there's some information in here. So for example, if a student has always thought, I'm just not a good standardized test taker, but I feel like my grades are better than how I show my potential with my testing. We list a website here called fairtest.org that lists all of the colleges that do not require standardized testing as a part of the admission process, and we'll talk more about that when we get to the panel. The college search process, so we talked about that during that meeting, and we again had them log into Naviance because I know in reality a lot of juniors probably haven't been logged into their Naviance account since the sophomore meeting that we had with them. So we made sure that every single junior could get back into their Naviance account. I call this a developmental process. I think students are in different places at different times. Some students have already signed up for their testing. Some students have already visited colleges. They've done their research, and now they're ready to get out there. And other students are kind of frozen at this point and really haven't started the process at all. My advice is you've got to do something. The worst thing that can happen is that you freeze and say, I'm going to put this off and put this off and put this off, because students still have the same type of schedule in their senior year, if not sometimes more difficult with their academic schedule, the extracurriculars and sports and all the different things that they do outside of school. And then they also have the college process throughout the fall. So anything that they can do now. So for example, I always say to juniors at this point now, think about what you have going on in your life between now and June when you get out of school, and think about when are those best test dates that you might want to take. So look at the calendar, look at the schedule of ACTs and SATs, and decide when, what Saturdays are best for you. So considerations might be, you play a spring sport and you have postseason competition that occurs in June, but you've signed up for the June test. Well, that's a problem. Then you have to make choices. So try to plan things out now. Decide all of the test dates between now and June. There's also a test date in August. There's an SAT test date in August just before we return. That's always a great date because students have the summer to maybe prepare, and they're not back in school yet. So that's always a good date to look at. When students are going into Naviance, and certainly as parents, if you attended the sophomore meeting, you were given your login for Naviance. Again, if you have forgotten how to get in and you need your password reset, please contact our secretary in the counseling office, Vicki McDonald, and she can help you with that. We do want parents to also have their account, because one of the things that we do ask of you when students are seniors is to complete something called the parent brag sheet, which cannot be accessed through the student account, so they can't see it. And that's always something that's very helpful and useful to us when we're writing the letters of recommendation. So in Naviance, some of the things that we went through were some of the inventories. And again, because we don't have a lot of access to students, we can't just, take time away from teachers and the teaching that they're doing in classes. We suggest to students, if you really don't know what you want to do, there are inventories such as Do What You Are, and the Strengths Explorer, and the Career Interest Profiler. Those are all inventories that students can take to help them figure out maybe where to get started with this process. Certainly the advanced college search that's in Naviance. There's a lot of different websites that students can go to, but Naviance does have that advanced college search. And certainly the scattergrams that are in Naviance, which plot Long Meadow High School students over the last 5 or 6 years, so it's more current data, and it's test scores and grade point average, so it's just that data. It's not including things like extracurriculars and recommendations and essays and all of that, but it gives students a general sense of maybe what their target schools are, what their safety schools are, and what their reach schools are based on that specific information. So that's another thing that students may want to look at. So I hope the students are looking at these. You can certainly access this. It has the National College Fair date that's coming up. I know it's also on the sheet that you picked up on your way in. Monday, April 6th, there's a large National College Fair over at the Eastern States Exposition. I certainly wouldn't just go over there without doing any homework. So we have encouraged students to do an initial search and maybe have a list of schools that they go there with. There's a site that's listed on here, necacfairs.org, where students can go to the site and find out who's going to be at the fair, so they can see whether or not there are schools that they are looking at and whether or not they'll be there to talk to. What I always say to students is those are great places to talk to admission representatives, because often it's the reps that are coming to see us in the fall, and also maybe the ones who are doing the first read on an application. So again, there's a lot of useful information. I would encourage students to look at this outline. There's also a page in here regarding the Common Application, which is an application that is used by hundreds of colleges, I think over 800 colleges. So it's a common application to many colleges, and students can actually create their account now, and there's a rollover process for when they actually begin the application process. There's a website that's listed on this page to let students know what's actually rolled over so they're not wasting their time. And another thing that we suggest that we have mentioned to students is when they log in to things like the Common App or SATs or ACTs, when they're creating their accounts on those sites, to use their personal email. And the reason why is once they leave here in June, they're going to lose their access to the LHS email. So it's important that they do use their personal email for those things. And when colleges are reaching out to them over the summer with information. So that's just a very general overview of what's in the booklet. On the back page, there are admission decision options, so it gives you the definitions of things like early decision, early action, rolling admission, regular admission. So it helps you to understand all those different admission options for students. So I want to certainly get into asking the questions of the panelists, and then we'll open it up for any questions that you may have. So the format for tonight is I will ask specific questions of the panelists. In some cases, a couple of panelists may answer the questions, or I may target one particular panelist. So the focus is on the college search, selection, and application process. Specifically, what students should be doing now to prepare for the application process next fall, and also what is of importance to colleges in the selection process. So I'll begin by introducing the panelists. So to my left is Mary D'Angelo from Springfield College. She's the Dean of Admissions at Springfield. To her left is Kate Gurton, Associate Director of New England Recruitment at Dickinson College. And then Emily Gibbings, she is the Associate Director of Admissions at Westfield State University. And then to her left is Mike Rossi, and he is the admissions coordinator at Springfield Technical Community College. So I'm going to get right into the questions. So as students begin the process, when students just begin the process of researching colleges, what advice would you provide to help students identify colleges that might be of interest to them? I know this is very open-ended. I just thought I'd get started with that question, and I would ask if everybody can maybe answer that.
Great. I think that you've already mentioned some of the resources that you've made students aware of, and Naviance is really a great place for students to start. Because it gives them an opportunity to, put in information about themselves, what they're looking for, and then we'll provide them with some schools that might be good matches for them. So prior to a student doing that, it's good for them to spend some time reflecting on what do they think is going to be important to them. Is it going to be size? Is it going to be location? Is it going to be type of focus academically, or are they looking more for a liberal arts institution? And then start to get a sense of what's out there, because as you know, there's a lot of colleges in the United States and abroad.
I would just encourage, when I work with students, we talk a lot about fit, and I think keeping fit at the forefront of your minds, students through this process, your fit, be authentically you in this process, be thinking about your interests, what type of places you see yourself at. If you keep fit at the forefront of your mind from the beginning of this process all the way to the point where you submit applications, if you end up applying to places that you feel like you could see yourself at, that you could be happy at, then ultimately, hopefully, you're going to end up somewhere that you're happy. And then think about it from our end. If we admit and enroll a class of students every year who could academically do the work and are going to contribute to our community, but also feel like this is their place for one reason or another, imagine the community that's created on a college campus when that happens too. So when you visit campuses, jot things down right away after that visit that meant something to you, that resonated with you, because things can start to blur. Or you have a conversation with an admissions counselor at a college fair or at your high school. Jot things down right away. I think that this process can seem overwhelming, and the more you can do to try to stay organized from the beginning and remember some of those gut feelings and the things that resonate or don't resonate, as you start to narrow down that list, it's really important.
absolutely agree with what the other panelists had said, and I think another factor to consider in all of this is affordability and financing your education. I always remind students, I know it's hard to see it now, but think about when you graduate from college and the expectations that you may have of wanting to live independently, or do you want to go on to graduate school, and you have to be extremely thoughtful about how much you want to invest in your undergraduate degree and how that plays into your long-term goals. And I can't stress enough, students, really have these open conversations with your parents and or your guardians about what is realistic for you and for your family. It is absolutely so important. Finding the community that you will fit in is as important as well. But if you watch the news on any given night, there's a crisis in this nation about student debt. And we're really, as admission officers and counselors, we have an obligation to make sure that we take you through the admission process, but we also assist you with how you're going to finance that process as well. So just keep that at your focus as well, would be my suggestion.
All right. Unfortunately, I really don't have too much to add beyond what's already been said. Definitely that fit is important. I think the number one thing is academics. It doesn't make much sense to go to a college that doesn't offer the program that you want. And then there's a variety of other things that have already been discussed. Do you want a large college? Do you want a small college? Do you want urban? Do you want rural? Do you want to stay at home, or do you want to live on campus? Do you want to go far, far away or stay local? All these things, and I think we'll probably talk about the college visit later on in the panel, but all these things are very, very important. Pretty much what everyone else has said, it's pulling up the tail end makes it a little difficult sometimes.
So creating a balanced list of colleges, how would you recommend a student does this? So we talk about things like targets and safeties and reaches, but there's a lot of other things that go into creating that balanced list. Does anyone want to take that on?
It's a really good point to bring up. I've been in admissions for over 20 years. I'm absolutely amazed by the average number of applications that a student will submit. When I first got into this business, I felt like the average was like 4 to 5. And now I'm meeting students who are submitting 15 to 20 applications. And it's good to have your bases covered in terms of those reach schools that you know are highly competitive schools to get into, whether it's just the general admission process or for a specific major. And it's also good to have those schools that, based on their college profiles and their student profile, you know that you're a candidate that would more than likely be admitted to the university. But I think students and parents, when you think about the number of applications that are submitted, for a lot of you, it's not so much whether you're going to get accepted, right? So a lot of you are prepared. You've done the SATs, you've done all the right things in terms of extracurriculars, and then it comes down to having to make this decision, and you've got 15 to 18 acceptances. It really becomes stressful. And so you want to be thoughtful right from the beginning about the number of applications submitting, but make sure that you have a nice variety. For example, I work with a lot of students who, based on conversations that we have, I recommend that for one reason or another, whether it's because they simply do not know what they want to major in, and students, by the way, and parents, that's okay. 16, 17, and 18-year-olds, it's really hard for them to understand what it is they want to commit to. Most of the incoming first-year class at Westfield State and from most of the state universities come in as undecided. We refer to them as exploratory. So that's okay if you don't know what you want to do as well. It's our job to guide you through this process once you enroll. But thinking about your major, thinking about geographically where you want to be, and then I think we'll get into the early decision, early action, and the pros and cons of doing that as well.
So these next few questions are related to the campus visit. When should you visit, and how should a student make the most of their visit? Mary, can you talk about that?
What we're finding is that students are visiting early and earlier, and we absolutely encourage that. So as families go through this process, you're going to find that colleges provide a lot of different types of opportunities for you to visit. And what we try to do is focus on where a student is in the process and provide the type of visit that we think will fit for them at that point in the process. So you will see probably more towards April, when many school systems are out for a spring vacation. You'll see a lot of the colleges offering programs specifically focused for juniors. And those are normally a general information session and a tour of the campus, which for juniors at that point in the process is really what they're looking for. You know, they don't want to be in a situation necessarily where they're having a one-on-one interview. They're not ready for that yet. They are just trying to get a sense of what the school is like, what it's like in terms of the facilities, but also the information that they learn in a general information session. Once a student enters the summer, many times they have visited a number of schools and might at that point decide to go and have some interviews. And schools differ very, very much in terms of what they will provide for interview opportunities, so that's something important to know. Many of the large universities do not have the ability to handle interview requests just because of the sheer volume of students that are looking at them. But some of the smaller colleges, and I'm sure some of the folks here on the panel work at schools, I know I do, where we do provide personal interviews. Sometimes schools will do it only in the summer. Other times schools will offer interviews throughout the course of the year. So if that's of interest, sometimes the summer is a good time to do that. Once a student hits the senior year, they're going to get invited to fall open houses. So students that are here, you should certainly expect to see your email boxes just explode with invitations to fall open house programs. Most institutions have those, and it's, again, a good opportunity to visit. Oftentimes that's the time when a college will start adding other people to the mix. So it won't be just a tour guide that you might meet. It won't be just an admissions person. It will be faculty members. It will be representatives from different clubs and organizations, different offices and departments on campus that provide service to students. It could be athletic coaches. So those are the types of things that you'll typically see during the fall. And then, you know, when it all comes together in the springtime and students are sitting there with their acceptance letters, then they'll start getting invited to accepted student open houses, where many students at that point do have it down to 2 to 3 colleges that they're seriously considering.
So Mary, you mentioned the interview. Does an interview have any weight in the application decision process? So maybe if you and Kate can answer that.
Sure. You know, I think that that's one of those questions where it will vary from school to school. But what I always encourage students to do is, if you get the sense that a college wants you to come for an interview, it likely means that they're going to use what they learned about you in that interview in their decision-making process, because it's important to them. They're encouraging it. They want you to come and have an opportunity to present yourself in that type of a setting. What you also could find, students, if you are looking at programs that are highly competitive, that have limited enrollment opportunities, for example, a health profession, a nursing program, engineering, if that's a school that is saying to you, we will interview you, I would absolutely encourage you to take advantage of that, because oftentimes programs like that involve faculty members in the review. If it's a highly competitive program and you live, we'll use Springfield as an example. If a student's applying to the physician assistant program and they live in Long Meadow and do not come for an interview, a faculty member is going to look at that and say, I wonder how interested they are in the physician assistant program at Springfield.
Yeah, again, interviews are one of those pieces, again, that varies school to school, and I think that's something you're going to hear with a lot of these pieces. It depends. is often the answer, and that's why, again, staying organized school to school that you're thinking about is really helpful. I'm regionally based up here full-time for Dickinson. Dickinson's in Pennsylvania, and I'm based full-time up here in Massachusetts. As you can imagine, being a regionally based counselor, I meet with students a lot, and I do a lot of interviews. We're a place that encourages it. It's optional, but I always recommend, if you are interested in a school and they give you the opportunity to interview, do it. It's a great way to sit down either with your regional counselor, your admissions counselor. Often with alums, I know in various regions, if there aren't regional counselors, there's often alums who have been trained by institutions to offer interviews. Or, in our case, for example, we have seniors on our campus who do interviews for students when they come to campus. So you could interview with any number of folks who've been trained to do that. But I think it's a great opportunity not only for you to learn, for us to learn about you, students, but also for you to get a better sense of whatever school or college you're interviewing. So to come prepared with questions, to sit there and be able to really, in any interview setting, be able to say and know why you're sitting with that person. That is so important. I promise you, any interview that you do, the questions will vary, but one that will probably be pretty constant is why that institution. So to come into those interview settings with a clear understanding of why this is a place that you're considering, to be able to clearly talk about what resonates with you with that college. So I always encourage interviews do not happen at those early visits when you visit schools. Go around, take time to get a feel for what you like and what you don't like. And when you've narrowed down that list of schools that you're planning to apply to, if they offer the interview, I'd encourage you to do it and have a strong understanding of why you're sitting there. And again, explore opportunities, because oftentimes interview opportunities could be in your backyard even if the school is not.
Does it make sense to visit a community college, and if so, what happens at a visit?
Community college. I think every school, whether they're public, private, 2-year, 4-year, residential, or commuter, has its own climate, its own culture, and each individual student may or may not fit with that environment on campus. It goes back to that fit that we were talking about before. Even if you look at the 3 local community colleges, Greenfield Community College, Hoyt Community College, and STCC, 3 state schools coming up in the quarter, we all have very, very different physical applications and different structures. So they are very different. Definitely recommend. Facilitate for them, but I definitely think that's valuable. No matter what type of institution you're going to, go in there, see what it's like, and get a feel for kind of what the vibe is like on campus. Because some students, going back to what was said before, may or may not see themselves there. Sometimes you'll go to a place and you'll be like, yes, this is home. Other times you'll go to a particular campus and you're like, nah, it's a good school, but it's just not my school.
Thanks, Mike. These next several questions are related to standardized testing. LHS gives exposure to both SAT and ACT by administering the pre-ACT and PSAT. Do you have any advice on which one students should take? Or does it matter?
I think, the ACT is starting to become a lot more popular out in the Northeast. More and more students are taking it. My advice to families is do both. We will use whatever test score we can use to the student's advantage. And I think it's been pretty clear to us that we're accepting more and more students now based on their composite ACT score versus their total combined SAT score. So we encourage you to do both. And students, there's great resources online for you to get prepared for these tests, and it's amazing how much difference they can make overall when you go to take whether it's the pre or the actual exam itself.
With so many colleges going test optional, how should a student determine whether to send or not send their scores? Kate, if you can answer that.
Sure. So Dickinson is a test optional institution. So I think important to look, first of all, at test optional at every individual institution. It can mean something different. So again, here's an it depends situation. For us, test optional means it's totally optional. If a student submits testing, I'll look at it. If they don't submit testing, I'm not thinking about it. We've been test optional since the 90s, a really long time. In our situation, it truly is optional if a student sends test scores or not. And I'm always happy to counsel on that with students, when they're kind of going back and forth on whether or not to submit. But also, always looking at schools and kind of what their middle 50%, you can usually find that information online for schools. What is that middle 50% of the accepted students, and kind of make a judgment call from there. Now, the it depends situation, a school could be test optional, but for those really, really competitive programs, nursing, for example, a school may say, we're test optional, except if you're applying to nursing. So be able to kind of decipher that. Or, we're test optional, but if you want to be considered for merit scholarships, you need to submit testing. So it's a school-to-school, even test optional is school-to-school in terms of what that really means. But certainly I think using your resources here in the guidance office, your counselors here, but also knowing that you have regional counselors at various institutions too who could help counsel on whether or not to submit.
Are standardized tests required for community college admission?
So the short answer is no. We are an open enrollment institution. However, there are some of our majors that have an SAT optional requirement. A few of our competitive admissions programs in our School of Health do suggest that students submit SATs, but the programs that do want that will also waive the SAT requirements if the applicant has 15 college credits with at least a 3.0 average. And we find for a lot of those very competitive programs, such as dental hygiene, radiography, sonography, nursing, in order to be competitive for the program, they really need to have at least those 15 college credits and that average to be a selective applicant. So I always encourage students, if you have good SAT scores, by all means submit them. But if you haven't either taken the SATs or your scores aren't what you want them to be, that's okay. When you first start taking your prerequisites for these types of programs, you can get the college GPA up and have the SAT requirement waived. Also for some of our STEM majors, such as engineering or computer science, SATs are also requested that they be submitted, but it's not a solid requirement. The department chair that reviews for those particular programs will take kind of a holistic look at the student's application. It's really the math and science grades that they're looking at, and if the student has really good SATs, that may bring up the math and science scores on the transcript a little bit. However, if the SATs are, again, not stellar, but they've got good grades in math or science, he won't consider the SATs and will admit the student directly into the program.
No.
Just real quickly, in terms of SATs for the Massachusetts State Universities, for students who have documented learning differences and have testing from the last 3 years, are not required to submit SAT scores. There is a section on our application that does indicate if you're looking for the SAT and or the foreign language waiver, and those will be waived for you with the appropriate documentation.
With the September 2020 ACT allowing for section retesting and superscoring, how will colleges be looking at these scores? I don't know if anyone has thought about that. And
We just go by the composite score. That's just what we're going to be going by. We don't look at the individual test scores.
We do the same thing.
just on one test? Or if they do take some sections?
Yes, that's a good question. It's not in front of us yet, so we haven't.
Right. Until we actually
Yeah.
have to deal with it, that's
Yeah.
when we'll
Yeah.
really make
It's
that
coming.
final decision.
Okay. So there seems to be a message from colleges that the optional writing section on the SAT and ACT is not being used in the admission process. And we hear this year after year, even though the writing was added, I don't know how many years ago again. Do you have any advice on whether students should take the writing section? we've been telling students, don't take it if it's not needed, and there are very few that require it. Any other advice on that?
That's good advice, Donna.
Anybody here require it?
No.
Okay. So there's an optional writing section on both the SAT and the ACT, and a lot of students are, they're never sure whether or not they should take it or not. One, it takes up a lot of their time in the test, and they may be tired, and if it's not useful, if they're not going to use it for any school, like none of their schools that they're applying to require it, don't do it. Don't pay the extra money for it, and don't waste your time and energy in taking it. So I think it's very important that as students begin to develop their list of colleges, to really look at that admission page and determine whether or not it's required. And I can honestly say it's a very, very small percentage, because they understand it's an essay written in a very short amount of time. It's not a true indicator of how they can write. I think the essay is much more important in the process than that essay on the standardized test. These next several questions are related to the transcript, grades, courses. How important is the level of rigor? So college prep, honors, AP, and I'll let anyone who wants to begin with that one.
Sure. So the way many schools, and I can't speak for everybody, and we all may do things a little bit differently even on this panel, look at transcripts. Speaking from a test optional institution, that transcript is the constant that we're seeing from every student that's applying. But we look at students within context of where they're coming from. So every high school is different in context of what the rigor of their curriculum in general looks like. The curriculum that a school can offer, it looks different. So school to school, every school is very different. So we actually don't recalculate a GPA. We are looking at a student within context of where they're coming from. I'm looking at strengths and trends on the application for a student from Longmeadow, for example. I'm taking a look at what is a student taking curriculum-wise in context of what's offered here. Identifying strengths and trends on the application in that respect. I can't penalize a student if they attend a school that doesn't offer APs, and at the same point I know that there are high schools where the rigor of the curriculum is strong across the board. So understanding students and where they're coming from oftentimes is the role and the responsibility of counselors who work with specific high schools. We get to know you really well. That being said, in terms of rigor, I always speak to rigor in terms of, I think we want to see students challenge themselves, but at the same point, we want to see students challenge themselves in a way that makes sense for them. So if a student is a strong student in math and never takes a step to challenge themselves in math, that would raise a red flag for us. So challenging yourself in a way that makes sense for you in high school, we want to see you doing well and being successful in a curriculum, and that's helpful for us in identifying a student's ability to be successful in our academic community, because at the end of the day, that is the most important part of this process. So understanding where students are coming from and challenging themselves in a way that makes sense for them is helpful to us in identifying academic success. Anyone, anything to add?
For the state universities and the UMassives in the Commonwealth, we're required to recalculate every single high school transcript that we get. Our GPA tends to come out around the same as what Longmeadow would come out as. The benefit, I often hear from parents, what is the benefit to students taking honors and advanced placement courses? It truly can be the difference from being a student being invited for an honors program at a university, and let me tell you, any little thing that you can add to your resume as a recent college graduate goes a long way. So saying that you would be able to participate in an honors program, that you graduated with a Commonwealth Honors designation, and also between getting the difference between getting merit money. So we all have a merit pool of money that we're working with, and some of the requirements that we're looking at is how many honors and advanced placement courses a student may have taken. With that said, we want to caution students and parents about balance, making sure that students aren't putting so much pressure on themselves of having to take 4 AP courses and all these activities and clubs after school, that it's really also finding that balance as well.
So sometimes when students enter the high school, it's a tough transition from 8th grade to 9th grade. So this question is related to how students do throughout their high school career. So is there a difference between how a student has performed academically in their freshman year in comparison to their senior year? Mary, do you want to answer that?
That's a great question, because many of us will look at progression. So Donna has certainly identified what sometimes is an obstacle for students, maybe particularly if they're coming from a smaller middle school to a larger high school, particularly to a high school that does have maybe greater academic rigor than what they may have been used to. So, you know, I like to think of junior and senior years as the years that are closest to when a student is going to be on our college campus. So if we see students get off to a slow start and then we see the trend going in a more positive direction, that to us means that this student has kind of caught fire. They recognize now how to be successful in their high school environment, and we have no reason to believe that that won't continue when they enter college. The reverse is problematic. So a student with a strong start who has a very successful first and second year, and then we see a downward trajectory, that's going to be something that is of great concern to us, because again, if that junior year is not as strong, the senior year not as strong, then you're looking at bringing somebody in to your college campus who has not achieved well academically in their most recent semesters of high school. Question.
Sometimes when we meet with students, you know, students talk about the regret that they've had as they entered the high school. They're immature, and then they, you know, start to pick up, you know, later on in high school, but still it's not good enough. They feel like it's not good enough for what they want to do. So if a student feels like that they have not done well academically or as much as they would have liked, can you talk about the different programs that are available to students who started at community college? So maybe, Mike, if you can start with that, and both you and Emily can talk about all the programs that a student has available to them.
All right. We just got to make sure we keep this pointed away from the speaker. All right. So while a lot of students may go into a community college from one of our career-based programs, a STEM program like HVAC or electronics or an allied health program, quite a few students will come to us as a stepping stone onto bigger and better things. They'll start with us to complete an associate's degree prior to transferring up, or maybe just to be with us for a semester to get their grades up before applying to a four-year college. The community colleges participate in a variety of transfer agreements. The first one is the transfer articulation within the state college system, broadly called mass transfer. If you'd like to, there's actually a nice website for mass transfer where we can actually look up transfer articulations between all the 15 community colleges and all the state universities. Basically, if a student starts at a community college and they graduate from one of the transfer eligible programs, and actually you can see the one-to-one list on that website, and they get a 2.5 grade point average as their cumulative graduating GPA, instead of filling out a common application or like a regular application, they fill out a special mass transfer application, and they can seamlessly transfer onto a junior year at that four-year college. That's the articulation agreement. The schools have already worked out saying that for 2 years, we'll take you in as a junior in our institution. Additionally, if the student gets a 2.0 actually do the transfer, they get a 3.0 then they get their tuition waived when they move on to the four-year college. Now, just a quick note, anyone here has looked at tuition for a state school. But when you say the student gets free tuition, that doesn't mean they get a free ride when they move on to Westfield or UMass. Tuition is a relatively small part of what the student is paying per credit. When you're here in a state college in the Commonwealth, the majority of what you're paying for are fees. All right, so but it is still a good savings, a little chunk taken off of the total cost. Recently, they've instituted something called the Commonwealth Commitment. It's kind of an add-on, if you will, to the mass transfer program. It has some additional responsibilities and some additional benefits above and beyond the standard articulation agreement. Commonwealth Commitment, there's not as many transfer pathways available as there are. There's not as many majors available for students. And the GPA requirement is higher. I believe it's a 3.0 for Commonwealth Commitment. And also there's a full-time requirement. Students need to complete their associate's degree in 2.5 years, which for a lot of community college students that may have job or family responsibilities might not be a realistic goal. But if you can maintain the GPA, you can get the finish in 2.5 years. Not only do you have the standard transfer agreement, they will also do I believe it's a 10% tuition reimbursement. And I think colleges may do it differently. Some colleges will do it at the end of the year. Some colleges may process that reimbursement at the end of every semester. Now again, that is a tuition reimbursement, not fee reimbursement. Still a good amount of savings. Additionally, one of the nice things about Commonwealth Commitment, as everyone knows, tuition and fees at colleges may periodically increase. When you go into the when you go into the Commonwealth Commitment program, you sign a participation agreement, and basically the tuition and fee rates for both the community college where you're starting and the four-year university where you're transferring are basically frozen. Your tuition and fee rates are grandfathered. So let's say you start off at STCC, between year 1 and year 2, our fees increase. Not for that student. They are grandfathered in at the tuition and fee rate in which they entered the program. And the same goes once they transition on to the four-year college. So it's a great opportunity. And I always encourage students to remember, while the Commonwealth Commitment option is there for them, if they can't meet it, either because of GPA requirements or because of the time limitations, they can always fall back to the regular mass transfer program. That's always there for them. Additionally, the community colleges participate in joint admissions articulation agreements with the private college. So say, for example, the student wants to go to AIC, they want to go to the Elms, Bay Path, Springfield College, so on and so forth. We participate in the same type of transfer agreements. It's not a universal 2.5 like the state college system is. The GPA requirement to transfer is going to be based on the major you're going into and to the college that you're going into. And on our website, we actually have a nice little PDF on our transfer page you can actually look at, which shows the transfer pathways if you are going from us to one of the local four-year private institutions. And additionally, if you graduate with a higher GPA, you don't get a flat tuition discount as you do with the state colleges. Instead, what they do is they give you a transfer scholarship, and that's based upon your GPA. So the higher your graduating GPA, the more scholarship money you might be in for when you transfer onto your junior year at the four-year private.
And then they come to Westfield State. The point of all this is that the Department of Higher Education in Massachusetts saw a need for students to be able to save money in this process. They wanted to make it streamlined, they wanted to make it transparent, and that's really what it is. If you're a student or your student is interested in business, you can literally major in business at STIC, graduate in 2.5 years, you have up to 2.5 years, come to Westfield State, and as a full-time student, we will graduate you in 2 years, 15 credits every semester. You can't beat it. And then Mike also mentioned the tuition waiver and the savings of frozen fees. So if you're enrolling at STIC for the fall of 2020 and you enroll at Westfield State in the fall of 2022, whatever the cost to attend Westfield State in the fall of 2020 is what the cost will be when the student gets there 2 years later. And we're having huge success with these programs. So I think for a long time, the community colleges were not on students' radar. It was not even an option. We have students who are high-achieving students going to the community colleges, taking advantage, and they're being mindful of their overall student debt, particularly if they want to go on to a graduate program and then ultimately earn their PhD. So something strongly to consider.
Actually, I have one thing to add, because you mentioned business. I do have a caveat. Within the regular mass transfer articulation agreement, it's a 2.5 GPA to transfer. There are 4 exceptions to that rule. If you are going to UMass Amherst, there are 4 majors at UMass Amherst that require a higher GPA. Those are nursing, engineering, computer science, and business. Their Eisenberg School is very competitive. So while the transfer articulation agreement still stands, the target GPA you need for those 4 majors, specifically at UMass Amherst, is going to be a little higher than the 2.5 that you would need for other majors and other colleges within the state college system.
So by the time students reach their senior year, they've basically met all of their requirements, graduation requirements, with the exception of English and their wellness or physical education class. How important is the course selection and grades in the senior year?
Sure, I think a lot of times students are thinking, oh wow, junior year is the most important year in this process. That's where I have to do the best, strongest work. And we just heard about that positive upward trend. When we're thinking about trends is so important. We don't want to see that downward trend. So for sure, that junior year is really important. But senior year is really, really important. I think we definitely want to see, when we're thinking about senior year, some of us require some sort of progress in grades in order to admit students, and some schools do not require any grades senior year. We're taking a look at the courses you're taking to make sure you're still challenging yourself, but also schools are looking at your final high school transcript when it comes in. So regardless of if we're looking for grades at the forefront, looking for first quarter senior year grades as part of your decision or not, we're going to see them come in afterwards. And every school is different, but certainly some schools may take that into consideration in terms of their admission, and whether or not a student may come in under academic probation if that's not successful. We're admitting you, assuming that you are going to continue that trend that you have kept up, that we are seeing when you're applying to us. So be really aware of that senior year, be aware of what you're taking, and continue that momentum, finish strong.
So these next couple of questions are related to the essay, and the essay is probably the most time-consuming portion of an application. So for example, the Common Application, which is accepted by hundreds of colleges, has 7 essay prompts to choose from. Do you have any advice on how students should get started, regardless if it's Common App or whatever? How would you recommend students get started on the essay, and maybe how they choose what they're going to write about? Mary, you want to?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, I think students need to spend time carefully looking at each of the questions, and then really reflect upon which one of those questions is going to give them the opportunity to share the most about themselves, the most important things about themselves that they would like the colleges and universities to know. In many instances, students, this is your only opportunity to speak for yourself in this process. So if you're applying to schools that do not encourage or even allow personal interviews, your voice in this process is going to come through that Common Application essay. So I think spending some time being thoughtful, being reflective about the questions, and really starting to think about, maybe you might choose 2 that are of great interest to you and start thinking about, what would I write for this question? What might I write for this other question? And then make a decision about which one will give us the most information about you as a person and as a student.
Sure, I would just also think about, as you're writing your drafts, starting to write your essay, think about after you've written it, have that question in your mind, what would I want the person reading this to know about me? And if you can answer that question clearly, then I think that's wonderful. And if you can't, then again, we're on the other end reading this, we're not learning something about you. I think it's less about the topic, more again about getting an understanding of who you are at the end of the day, understanding or learning something about you. And if you can answer that clearly after reading it, then doesn't matter what you've written about necessarily. And I would also just make sure, again, that your voice, your authentic voice is coming through that essay. One of the topics, for example, is writing about someone who's had an influence on you. And certainly, I've read a lot of essays where, I would have loved to have admitted grandma, you know, like she sounds wonderful, but at the end of the day, we're looking to admit you. So talk about that person, but give some examples of how that person influenced you with specific examples about you. I think, again, we're looking to admit you, looking to get to know you, and that's just one example.
We don't require essays at Westfield State, and most of the state universities don't, and that's mainly because of the sheer volume of applications we get. However, for that student, I refer to it as like a traffic light, right? There's those green light students based on GPA, SATs, courses taken, I can accept them right away. There are those students who are the red lights, they're below a 2.0, I can't do anything for them. But for certain students who are like the yellow lights, like the SATs, the GPA may not exactly where it's going to be, but I'm starting to dig a little bit deeper. And I'll look at the essay or recommendations. One of the best essays I've ever written, a student, the gist of it is, he's like, I have no idea what I want to major in. I know I'm surrounded by friends and classmates who know exactly what they want to do, and I have no idea. But I know I'm creative. I know I can be a good writer. I know I kind of like math, but not really. And it was super truthful. I know I want to be part of a community where I can learn and grow. And I got to tell you, it was probably one of the best essays I've ever written. And students and parents, I think it just gives you a little bit of insight as to, it's about, you know, reflecting on yourself and not just writing down what you think we want you as admission officers to hear about. So.
Yeah, I know, Kate, you had said regarding this process, be authentic. And I think this is where you definitely want to be authentic. And someone said this on a panel before. Once you've written that essay, have someone read it. A family member, maybe a close friend, so that they can say, because they're probably going to be honest with you, to say, yeah, this really sounds like you. This is who you are. Or, oh my God, who are you trying to be? Because sometimes, you know, I think students feel like they need to sell themselves, but just be who you are. The admissions offices understand that you are, you know, 17, 18-year-olds that are writing these essays. They don't have to be these well-written documents. They just need to be, you know, a description of who you are. Because I always say this is really, I mean, you have this two-dimensional process, all this stuff that you're putting out there on the application. But the essay really just gives some sense of who you are as a person, especially if you didn't go on campus and meet with anyone where someone got to talk with you on that campus. So the essay is important. Can someone talk about how is the essay used in the admission decision? So how much weight, can it make or break somebody?
Yeah, I think the essay, again, is a piece of the puzzle. I don't know that an essay is ever going to replace grades and the work a student's done in the classroom or any of that, but I think it's a good reflection of who you are. Again, we're looking to learn something from you, and I also would comment in regard to the essay, if you're not excited about what you're writing about, or if you're not passionate about it, or if it's boring for you, it's probably going to be boring for us. So again, be thinking about all of that as you're writing. I think there's a lot of pressure on the essay to be your best piece of writing, and yes, it should absolutely be a wonderful piece of writing. It should show you your ability as a writer, but your whole application, students, should be your best piece of writing, and I think that sometimes that gets lost. You know, there are supplemental essays that are required from some schools, and those should be just as strong as your essay in terms of your writing, or even when you're writing your activities list, right? There are times that I see a student might not capitalize where they should or punctuate it well. The whole application should reflect that you as a writer, and so it should certainly come through in your essay, but that whole application. And so this process, and I think, again, it depends on the institution how much this essay means, but it's our window into who you are, and in some cases the only window. And so it gives us additional context in terms of when we're thinking about your fit with our institution, and how you'll aid in our community. Hope that helps. Does anyone? Okay.
So we talked about the transcript, and I think everyone agrees that's probably the most important thing, no matter where you apply to colleges. It's that 4 years worth of a student's work that really shows what their potential is on a college campus. And then certainly the essay plays a role, the standardized tests, if required, plays a role. And then there's the recommendations. So students will be thinking about, as they go through the spring, who are those teachers that they want to ask for recommendations? So my question is, how would you recommend students go about finding the right teachers to write their recommendations? Any suggestions on subjects or, what years? What might the recommendations be? And maybe Mary, Kate, and then certainly Emily, if you want to comment on that as well.
Yeah, I think, well, firstly, you should probably choose somebody who you're pretty positive likes you. That would be the first thing. But, Donna makes a good point when she mentions subject areas. Some colleges will tell you who they would like to have these references come from in terms of the subject area. If they don't, so if you're applying to colleges where there's no recommendation on content area, sometimes it's good to reflect upon the academic program you're applying into, if you are applying into a specific major, and choose someone who taught you in a class that's related to that particular academic area. I think that, the recommendations are so useful to us because if students are thoughtful about who they select, oftentimes we're getting to read a recommendation that comes from someone who has seen a student grow and develop over 4 years, and talk about what they might have been like when they entered the high school and the product that's going to be graduating in a few months. And that's really exciting for us to be able to have somebody comment on how they've seen a student grow and mature and be ready and get prepared to handle this next chapter in their life. Oftentimes what we'll see is that students gravitate towards courses where they achieve great academic success. So, they say, okay, who gave me an A? Those are the people that I'm going to think about. That's not always the best person to ask. Sometimes the person who gave you the B- knows you better as a student because that's a class that maybe you struggled in, where you had to come after school and get additional help, where the teacher is well aware that you were concerned about your grade, you wanted to do well, you were into what you were learning, and even though the grade might not, be the top grade that you could have achieved, you learned a lot because you put a lot of time into it and you put a lot of effort into it, and you had an opportunity to work closely with that teacher to help you understand the content.
Completely agree. And I would also just add, if there is a moment of struggle during high school, there's a piece of your transcript where you think we might say, I wonder what happened here. There are opportunities in your application to talk about that. There's a whole section of the Common App titled Additional Information. I feel like students don't necessarily use that as much as they could if there's something you want that you think deserves more explanation. And an interview is a great opportunity for that, but I think recommendations are too. And I think that's also being thoughtful about who you're choosing. Again, like Mary said, who can really speak to it. This grade might not be most indicative of of who you are, but here are the ways you advocate for yourself. Here are the ways that you as a student that you utilized your supports, and I think that can provide context to an part of your transcript where we may say, I wonder what happened here.
So the last part of the application process that's considered is the activities, the athletics, the volunteer work, all those things outside of academics that students are doing that certainly play a role in the admission process. Outside of academics, what are colleges looking for in terms of activities? This is always, I can tell you in the sophomore meetings that I have with students and parents, one of the questions I'm often asked is, what should we be doing? Is there that magical particular activity So if anybody can speak to that.
I hate to break it to you, but there is no magical, special activity. It's a different world that we're in now. I think students have responsibilities far greater than when we were growing up. They're balancing family. They may have more responsibilities when they're within their family. That does not allow them to be involved in as many activities as they would like to be. I also want to let students and parents know that we're not looking for laundry lists of activities. Quite frankly, I would rather see a student list a couple of different, whether it's community service, varsity sport, they may dance, they're part of their student government, one or two of those things, and they do it really well, and they're committed to it. Versus the student who's involved in 15 different things. I don't know how any one student can be involved in 15 different clubs, activities, organizations, and hold a part-time job, right? So it's meaningful. We want it to be meaningful for the student. And quite frankly, we're looking for students to join our community. So we hope that whatever your student or students that you're doing outside of the classroom, you're going to bring to our campuses. If you think about it this way, the most that you're going to be in classes is about 15 to 16 hours a week. You are used to being in class from 7:30 in the morning until 2:30 in the afternoon. That is a lot of extra time that you're going to have on your hands. And one of the biggest things that we try to do on all of our campuses is promote student life outside of the classroom. Obviously, academics are the priority, but student life at this point in time is really just as important. So we hope that if you're interested in student government in high school, but you never put yourself out there, that's okay, because you can still do it at Westfield State, or at Springfield College, or at Dickinson, or at Stick. If you weren't a student ambassador, if you weren't part of this club, that's okay. You can still do it at the four-year school. Think of this as your new story, your new chapter. And so, again, the laundry lists are non-existent as far as we're concerned at Westfield State. It's more about what is important to you, and that can just be one or two things.
And I just want to say on applications, sometimes you're given very limited space to communicate this information. I know especially like with the Common App, which a lot of students will use, you have to be very careful as to how you list your activities. So it's something that you want to be thoughtful about now. What we recommended to students when we met with them is to really be thinking about these things now. And I know we say these same things in the sophomore meeting. Start to think about what you've done over the last couple of years, the last 3 years, because as you get into your senior year and you have to begin that application process, if you haven't thought about all these things that you've done throughout your high school career, you may forget things. So whether or not a student creates the resume in Naviance, which they certainly can, or create a Google document and just begin to list those things and then go back to it occasionally as they recall things that happened, if it's a sport, what did I do, what position did I play, all the details. You want to be as detailed as possible because, again, you're communicating what you did. Did you play a leadership role? Even if you weren't named a captain, sometimes students tell me, well, I was like a quasi-captain because these are the things I did and these are the things that the coach said to me. So think about those things and begin to write that down now so that you can take it from those documents and have a pretty detailed list. Again, it's not quantity, it's more quality. And I would say this is where parents can come in as well. Share it. Students should share it with their parents to see if there's anything that they've missed. That's why the parent brag sheet really plays a role for us, because sometimes parents think of things or write things that students wouldn't really think about because they're teens. So that's very helpful to us. In terms of leadership, how important is demonstrating leadership in clubs, activities, and/or sports? Because one of everybody can't be a leader. So I don't know if anyone can really talk about, whether it's informal leadership or does it play a role, does it matter?
I would say when we're looking at activities, yes, that ability to make a commitment, sustained commitments absolutely stand out. The the quality over the quantity, the things you devote a lot of time to, that stands out as well. So maybe it's not something that you've done for 4 years, but maybe you got a job in the summer and now you're working 20 hours a week, and there's something that you're devoting a lot of time to. But absolutely leadership, we are looking at too. And again, it could be formal or informal. But it could be even, you're a peer mentor, right? You may not be the captain of the cross-country team, but you're a peer mentor. Mentorship, leadership, this ability to take on more responsibility in whatever way you can portray that to us, that certainly is something that we're thinking about as well.
This is related to student athletes. Should students who are hoping to play sports in college start any of the process, SATs, ACTs, earlier than non-athletes? Anyone have a comment?
I mean, I think the only reason that students might want to consider starting it earlier is if they think they're going to be applying to Division I or Division II institutions where they're going to have to go through the NCAA clearinghouse process. So for those students, doing testing earlier probably would be important.
Yeah, so any student athlete who is thinking about applying to a Division I or Division II institution because they want to play a sport at one of those institutions, they do have to go through the eligibility center at the NCAA. That's something that generally starts at the end of the junior year. So students want to go to that NCAA eligibility center site and sign up and start their account, and then we go in and send transcripts. So it begins the process for any student athletes. Again, just D1 and D2, not Division III. Next couple of questions related to students who may be looking for, if they have learning differences and they're looking for some extra support. What advice would you give to a student on disclosing their learning disability?
We encourage students, the more information that you disclose in the application process, the better we can serve you. And this process is just as important as us finding out about you as it is for the student and the parent to understand what services we can offer. So all of the state universities and UMass's by law are required to offer reasonable accommodations for those students who have documented learning differences. At Westfield State in particular, we have a full program dedicated to students who, again, have documented learning differences that go above and beyond what's required minimally by law. So our goal is to enroll you and to make sure that we have the pieces in place to make sure that you're successful. If we don't know about this information, sometimes that can lead to a disconnect. That transition from high school to college is a huge one for any student, and the more information we have, the better. Disclosing a learning difference does not put you at a disadvantage in the application process. That would be like reverse discrimination, and that just doesn't happen. So we absolutely encourage you to do so. I would also make sure that you're checking in with your special education point person or liaison from your high school to see if you're eligible for additional testing. The more updated testing we have, we usually require it from the last 3 years, the better we can provide services for the student.
So one step further, would you recommend that a student set up an appointment with a disability center on campus?
Yeah, I would absolutely encourage you to do so. Our learning disabilities program, referred to as the Bonacos Academic Center, regularly does appointments with students. They're part of our open house program as well, and they give presentations all the time, so I definitely encourage you to do so.
I want to go back to academics and specifically like special programs on campuses. So we talked earlier about colleges reporting their mid 50% of scores that they accept, mid 50% of GPAs. So when students look at scattergrams, they can kind of see, where do they fit in terms of targets, reaches, and safeties. But sometimes there are outliers on those scattergrams. So Mary, maybe you can answer this question. A lot of campuses have special programs, so if you could speak to specifically like your health sciences and how that might be different in the admission process from general admission.
Yeah, there are, Springfield and certainly many other institutions that have programs that might be significantly more selective than general admission to the institution. And so the data that Donna's referring to that would come across in a scattergram or as part of an academic profile for an entering first year class might not reflect the same academic requirements for some of these programs that are more selective. Of course, the hope is that colleges are always going to be very transparent about that. And certainly, and I'm sure most of us are, so that when we present an information session, we know that students and families want to know what a typical academic profile looks like, but we also make sure to always add the caveat that there are some limited enrollment programs that are direct entry, highly competitive because of the limited number of spots. What we have done, and I know other institutions have done, is on the website. It's always critically important if a student is looking at a particular academic area, go into the website and see if on the web pages for the program, they list any special admissions criterion, because that's oftentimes where you're going to find it. And so that's a great question, and I think it's really important as students are looking at those types of programs to try to get at that information in terms of special admissions requirements and special admissions criterion.
So as students approach the fall of their senior year, some of the decisions that they will need to make is, do they apply early? Do they apply early decision? Do they apply early action? Do they wait for regular admission? If someone could talk about one ED versus regular decision, and then who should go early, whether it's ED or EA.
So early decision is a application deadline many schools offer for students to be able to apply generally early in the process. And as a sort of caveat to that, the student is making a commitment that if admitted, that is the place that they will be enrolling. Regular decision or even early action. Early action schools often will have a deadline a little bit earlier than regular decision without that binding commitment. And then regular decision tends to be a little bit later in the process. As someone who works somewhere with an early decision deadline, we have two actually. We have an early decision 1 deadline in November and an early decision 2 deadline in January. We know not everybody is ready in November to make a commitment to say that they're applying somewhere and 100% wanting to make a commitment that they'll be attending. So oftentimes that January early decision 2 deadline is nice for those students. First of all, if a student's going to apply early decision, it has to be the place. So having had the conversation with folks on campus, having hopefully visited a campus by that point. We know not every student can visit every college before they apply, but certainly if you're applying early decision and you're making that commitment to go to that place, you hopefully have had a chance to see that college ahead of time, have had conversations. It really should be, if you're applying early decision anywhere, it absolutely should be an academic fit. It should be a social fit, and it should be a financial fit as well. So I know many places, financial aid counselors will do, sit down with families who are thinking about early decision to kind of talk about here's how things might look if you were financial aid wise, if you were to apply early decision, because you're making this commitment to go, and generally financial aid is really the one place where there's some wiggle room in kind of removing yourself from that binding commitment. But we don't want students, for example, at Dickinson, to apply early decision if that's going to happen, right? And so we make it available to students ahead of time to have conversations with financial aid, even do an opportunity for a merit pre-read in opportunities where students might want to get a sense of what I might be considered for in that respect. So it is a really big decision to make, and many students are not ready to make that decision, and we don't want you to make that decision if you are not ready to make that decision. But utilize your resources, have those conversations. But I would say if you are thinking about applying early decision anywhere, you should have those boxes checked. Yes, this is going to be an academic fit, a social fit, and a financial fit. And on terms of financial aid, just we haven't touched on this at all, but every college and university out there is required to have what's called a net price calculator on their websites. Generally, within 3 clicks of the home page, it should be able to be found. And that gives families often a nice sense ahead of this process, an estimate of what financial aid may come your way. And so it's a good resource as well as you're thinking about this process.
So regarding financial aid, we will have a financial aid night in September. So that is prior to the FAFSA opening up on October 1st. So we will address information regarding financial aid on that night. Is there any particular time when a student would not be recommended to apply early action or early decision? Can anyone think of any times that it might not make sense that they should wait until regular?
In terms of early in general, I just think for students, you want to apply to schools at the point where you're able to put your best foot forward. We want to see you at your best. And so if you're coming off junior year, maybe in a little bit of a slump, or any reason why you're, not as a senior walking in with everything sort of tied up and ready to go, there's nothing wrong with waiting. Let us see a quarter, or let us see a semester of your grade senior year. If there is a reason why applying early is not going to allow you to put your best foot forward in this process, then that is a reason not to apply early somewhere, whether that's early decision or early action.
To me, early action is the happy medium, right? It's non-binding. So students can, usually the deadlines are November 15th to submit their application, all required materials, and they receive a decision usually around December 15th. The big thing to think about is that you don't have to make a decision until May 1st, which is the National Candidates Reply Date. So if you were accepted with a merit scholarship, on-campus housing, in the major that you want, you have until May 1st to make that decision. And at the end of the day, we want to make sure it's the right fit for you, as we all keep talking about. You want to go to all these accepted student days. You want to get another look at them so that by May 1, you're making the decision that's comfortable for you. And the other piece of this too, and we've touched upon it a little bit, is hearing about financial aid. Be careful about making that knee-jerk reaction of sending in a deposit to a school when you don't have all the pieces in place, particularly about financial aid.
I think I'm going to open it up now for any questions that you have. Okay.
Since we're talking early decision, early action, can you apply to more than one college at early action?
The question was, can you apply to more than one school for early action? And the answer is yes. For early decision, no.
However, there is something called restrictive early action. So there are very few schools out there. And a very general rule of thumb, the more selective schools. And they say that if you apply early action to their school, they do not want you applying anywhere else until after you've gotten your decision. The only exception to that sometimes is that you can apply to your own state university, one of your state universities in the state. But those are rare cases.
Emily, I think you said something about recalculated GPA. What is a recalculated GPA?
Sure.
As I mentioned, we're required, all the state universities and UMasses, to recalculate a student's GPA, so we don't go by the GPA that's presented on the high school transcript. We do our own calculation. So courses like physical education, health, some other elective courses will not be included in the GPA. We're strictly looking at the academic courses. The other thing too is that we'll give extra weight to honors and advanced placement courses. So if your student's receiving a B in an honors course, we'll weight it as a B+. If that course is an advanced placement course, they'll get a whole grade higher. If the student submits their first quarter senior year grades, we will recalculate those as an entire year. So we realize that there are a lot of students, and this is okay, that have kind of seen the light late in their academic career, and they do really well in their senior year. Those are the cases that I wouldn't recommend the student applying for early action. Submit your first quarter grades, because that 1 year of grades can really make a difference as to whether or not a student can be admitted or not. Does that answer your question? Yep.
And when students submit applications, we automatically send first quarter and mid-year and then the final. Any other questions? In the back?
If a student submits for early decision or early action and they're not accepted, can they be reconsidered during the regular admission period?
Yes. Students can be we have, for students who apply for early action for us, if we weren't able to accept them right away, we automatically put them into our general admission pool. And I think that's pretty standard.
Yeah, I would just say if we know when we're reviewing a student early decision that it's not going to be a fit. It's not going to, for whatever way, shape, or form, we may reject a student early decision. Many cases, though, too, there are opportunities where students may be deferred into that regular decision round. So again, I think it depends school to school, but ultimately, if we don't want to necessarily carry a student on if at that point we feel like it's not going to be a great fit for whatever reason.
Can you talk at all about social media and how that impacts your decisions? Like, do you research that at all on prospective students coming into your schools?
No, we don't use social media, but I'm glad you bring it up because, again, we live in a very different world, and our students, I have a sophomore in high school, and I remind her every single day to think about what she's doing and how that's going to play. A couple of pieces of advice, that be thoughtful tell your students to be thoughtful about the email that they're using. Donna mentioned don't use school emails. Some of these email addresses are just like, you get them and you're like, oh my God, and you've actually used this email to submit a college application. The other thing too, and I know some students don't think about this, is the voicemails that they have on their cell phones. We call accepted students. I will call students real quick to say, I'm reviewing your application, I'm missing this one little thing, can you clarify? And I'm listening to the voicemail, I'm going, this is not a student that I want part as my college community. And again, what they're posting on social media, it's amazing what will come back to haunt them. So the answer is no, we don't use social media in this process. But it's amazing how it can catch up with students in other ways that will impact their experience at the university or whether or not they decide to come to Westfield. Or any schools.
I would say, every school again is different. I would say most places don't have the time to be using it as part of the admissions process. I'd say where I have seen it come into play, or have heard places where it's come into play is around those accepted student groups that start to form on Facebook, for example, and friends, admitted students become friends with one another. And one admitted student may find something that's disturbing on another admitted student's page, and we will hear about that. So that's where we may not see it initially, but could hear about it down the line.
Beth?
You mentioned something about scores changing when they're recorded in September of 2020, and I missed that. But did that have anything to do with super scoring? Does that still take place?
So one of the things that ACT is doing, starting with in September of 2020, is that they're now going to allow students to go back and just take one section, or two sections, or three sections. They don't have to sit for the entire test. So my question to the panel was, how are you going to look at that? And they haven't really decided because it's a new thing, whether or not they're going to put them together. Are they going to allow, are they going to look at their best scores? How is that going to be looked at? Anyone else? All right, I want to thank our panel for being here thank you for coming.